You're a disgrace to this uniform. I'll make sure you never command again. Those were his exact words, whispered not in private, but in front of everyone during parade inspection. My SEAL Admiral, the man who once trained me, leaned close enough for his breath to hit my ear, and then walked past like I didn't exist. But 30 minutes later, the command center called, "Meet your new superior officer." He didn't know. I was that officer. Brothers and sisters, before we go deeper, please like this video, subscribe to this channel, and comment below where you're watching from: Nigeria, the US, the Philippines, Europe, or anywhere around the world. Because what you're about to hear isn't just a story about revenge, it's about respect, rank, and the moment pride bows to discipline. You want to know how this all started? You want to understand how someone who was supposed to lift me up became the man who tried to tear me down? Then listen carefully, because this story begins in the place where most of us started, at the bottom, clawing our way up through grit and determination. I wasn't born into privilege. I didn't have generals for fathers or senators for mothers. I started in the hangars, fixing engines others gave up on. My hands were always covered in grease. My uniforms always smelled like fuel and metal. While other recruits were polishing their boots for inspection, I was under aircraft, learning how every bolt and wire could mean the difference between life and death in the field. But you know what? That's where I learned real discipline. Not the kind they teach you in formation drills, the kind that comes from knowing that if you mess up, people die. Every repair I made, every system I tested, every piece of equipment I certified, lives depended on it. And I carried that weight with me every single day. That's when I first met Admiral Robert Cole. He wasn't an admiral then, just a commander with sharp eyes and a reputation for seeing potential where others saw problems. I was working late one night, trying to figure out why a helicopter's navigation system kept failing during test flights. 3 different mechanics had looked at it, all said it needed complete replacement. But something didn't feel right to me. I'd been there for 14 hours straight when he walked into the hangar. Most officers would have barked at me to go get some sleep, asked why I was wasting time on a lost cause. But Admiral Cole, Commander Cole back then, he just stood there watching me work. Didn't say a word for 20 minutes. Finally, he spoke up. "What do you see that they don't?" I looked up at him, grease smeared across my cheek, exhaustion weighing down my shoulders. "Sir, the navigation system isn't the problem. It's the mounting brackets. They're creating micro vibrations that throw off the calibration. The system works perfectly, it just can't function properly when it's being constantly jarred." He nodded slowly, like he already knew. "Show me." And for the next 2 hours, we worked together. Me with my hands in the guts of the machine, him asking questions that pushed me to think deeper, to see connections I'd missed. When we finally got that helicopter running smooth as silk, he looked at me with something I'd never seen from a superior officer before: respect. "What's your name, soldier?" "Mechanic 3rd Class Sarah Mitchell, sir." "Not anymore," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "You're thinking like an officer. Maybe it's time you started training like one." That was the beginning. Admiral Cole didn't just see potential in me, he nurtured it. He became my mentor, my guide, my example of what leadership looked like. When I struggled with tactical theory, he'd break it down into mechanical terms I could understand. When other officers questioned why a grease monkey was suddenly in officer candidate school, he defended me. "Mitchell doesn't just fix machines," I heard him tell a skeptical major once. "She understands systems. And military operations? They're just complex systems with human components." Under his guidance, I thrived. I graduated top of my class from OCS. I excelled in specialized training. I earned my place in the SEALs through blood, sweat, and determination. But always with his voice in my head, pushing me to be better, to think sharper, to lead with both strength and wisdom. He called me his best officer. Said I had instincts that couldn't be taught, only developed. When I received my first commendation, he was there in the front row, pride written all over his face like I was his own daughter. When I got my first independent command, he pulled me aside afterward. You're going to do things I never could, Mitchell. You see solutions where others see only problems. Don't ever let anyone convince you that your way of thinking is wrong. I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. I thought he was lifting me up, building me into the officer he knew I could become. I thought our bond was unbreakable, forged in grease and sweat and mutual respect. Turns out, he was only preparing me to kneel. The mission that changed everything happened 18 months ago. Operation Desert Shield, a joint extraction in hostile territory. Intelligence suggested a terrorist cell was holding 3 American contractors in a compound about 40 kilometers from the Syrian border. Simple extraction, in and out. Minimal engagement. Admiral Cole was commanding the operation from headquarters while I led the ground team. Everything was proceeding according to plan until we reached the target coordinates. That's when I saw what the satellite images had missed. The compound wasn't just a terrorist hideout, it was a school. A refugee school with dozens of children still inside, being used as human shields. The contractors were there, all right, but extracting them the way Admiral Cole had planned would have meant going through those kids. I radioed back immediately, Command, we have civilians on site. Repeat, multiple civilian casualties likely if we proceed as planned. His voice crackled back through the calm, ice-cold and impatient. Mitchell, the mission parameters are clear. Extract the targets using the planned route. Collateral damage is acceptable within mission parameters. Collateral damage. He was talking about children like they were broken equipment. Sir, requesting permission to adapt the approach. I can see an alternative entry point that avoids the civilian areas entirely. Negative, Commander. You have your orders. Execute the mission as planned. But I could see those kids through my scope. 7, 8, 9 years old. Scared, confused, caught in the middle of something they couldn't understand. I thought about what Admiral Cole had taught me about leadership, about seeing solutions where others see only problems. Sir, I'm going to recommend we abort and reassess. The risk to civilian life is unacceptable. The silence on the comm lasted forever. When his voice came back, it was different. Harder. Colder. Commander Mitchell, you will execute this mission as ordered, or I will have you relieved of command immediately. I stared at that compound through my binoculars, watching children play in what they didn't know was a war zone. Everything Admiral Cole had taught me about leadership, about doing the right thing even when it was hard, about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, it all came flooding back. Command, I'm adapting the approach. We're going in through the east wall. Mission will be completed with 0 civilian casualties. Mitchell, if you disobey a direct order. I switched off the comm. For the next 3 hours, my team and I executed a precision operation that would have made any SEAL unit proud. We identified guard rotations, found structural weaknesses the satellites hadn't detected, and created a diversion that drew security away from the civilian areas. We extracted all 3 contractors without firing a single shot near those children. 0 civilian casualties. 0 American casualties. Mission completed successfully. But when we returned to base, Admiral Cole was waiting for me in his office. His face was stone, his voice like winter. You disobeyed a direct order. I completed the mission successfully with no unnecessary casualties, sir. You question my judgment. You undermine my authority. You put American lives at risk for the sake of enemy civilians. Enemy civilians. Children became the enemy the moment they stood between him and his perfect operation. Sir, with respect, adapting to field conditions is part of effective command. We achieved all mission objectives while minimizing. While maximizing your own ego, he cut me off. You think you know better than officers with decades more experience. You think your way is always the right way. I stood there at attention, watching the man who'd been my mentor transform into someone I didn't recognize. The pride in his eyes had turned to something else, something that looked almost like hatred. "You saved those contractors, Mitchell. But you embarrassed me in front of the entire command structure." That's something I won't forget. And he didn't forget. God, how he made sure I knew he didn't forget. The man who once called me his best officer now called me a problem. It started small. Suddenly, my mission reports took weeks longer to process. Training exercises I was supposed to lead got reassigned to other officers with less experience. Promotions I was clearly qualified for disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. When I asked about the delays, I was told there were questions about my command decisions that needed further review. When I requested copies of these reviews, I was told they were classified above my clearance level. When I tried to schedule meetings with Admiral Cole to discuss my career trajectory, his aide always had excuses. He was in meetings, he was traveling, he was dealing with urgent matters. But I saw him every day. In the mess hall, where conversations stopped when I walked by. At morning briefings, where he'd acknowledge every other officer by name and rank, but refer to me only as commander. In training scenarios, where he'd publicly question my decisions in ways he never questioned anyone else's. The message was clear. I was being frozen out. Isolated. Made into an example of what happened when junior officers got too big for their boots. But here's what Admiral Cole didn't understand about the woman he'd trained. I learned patience from fixing broken machines. I learned persistence from diagnosing complex problems. And I learned documentation from systems where every step had to be recorded and verified. So while he was busy playing politics, I was busy building my case. Every delayed report, every missed promotion, every reassigned mission, I documented it all. But more importantly, I kept serving. I kept excelling. I kept proving that my judgment was sound and my leadership was effective. When other officers started noticing the pattern of how I was being treated, some of them began speaking up. Quietly, carefully, but they spoke up. My direct reports consistently rated my leadership in the top percentiles. Other units requested my involvement in joint operations. International allies specifically asked for me by name on collaborative missions. Admiral Cole could slow down my promotions, but he couldn't erase my performance record. He could isolate me from his inner circle, but he couldn't stop other officers from recognizing effective leadership when they saw it. He could make my life difficult, but he couldn't make me quit. And that's what really aided him. He wanted me to break. He wanted me to request a transfer, to resign my commission, to disappear quietly so he could get back to running things his way. He wanted me to validate his decision to destroy my career by proving I wasn't worth the uniform I wore. Instead, I kept showing up. I kept serving with excellence. I kept proving him wrong every single day. The promotion board met last month. They reviewed my complete service record, not just Admiral Cole's version of it, but the full picture. They saw the mission successes, the leadership evaluations, the innovations I'd brought to tactical operations. They saw an officer who'd faced adversity and responded with professionalism and continued excellence. When the board reviewed my record, they didn't demote me, they promoted me to his command. Which brings us to 3 days ago. The day that changed everything. The day Admiral Cole finally got to say exactly what he thought of me. Desert sun beat down mercilessly on the parade ground. The kind of heat that makes metal too hot to touch and uniforms stick to your skin before you've been outside for 5 minutes. But parade inspection waits for no weather, and Admiral Cole had called for a full dress review of all personnel. 237 service members stood in perfect formation, boots polished to mirror shine, uniforms pressed with military precision. The kind of inspection where everything has to be perfect, brass gleaming, weapon spotless, posture ramrod straight. Admiral Cole loved these displays of absolute control. He moved down the first rank slowly, methodically. Every salute had to be crisp. Every response had to be immediate and precise. He'd stop randomly, check weapon maintenance, inspect uniform details, ask protocol questions. Anyone who failed to meet his exacting standards would be called out publicly, made an example of in front of their peers. This was his theater, his stage, his moment to demonstrate the absolute authority he wielded over every person on that base. I stood in the third rank, exactly where regulation placed an officer of my current grade. Not in front with the senior command staff, not in back with the junior officers. Right in the middle, where I could see everything but was mostly invisible unless specifically called upon. Admiral Cole finished with the first 2 ranks without major incident. A few minor corrections, a scuffed button here, a wrinkled collar there, but nothing dramatic. He was saving his performance for later. Then he reached my section. I could feel the change in his demeanor before he even got close to me. His shoulders squared differently. His pace slowed. His eyes sharpened with a focus that made every soldier in my vicinity nervous. He worked his way down the line, taking longer with each inspection than he had with anyone else. Testing, probing, looking for any excuse to find fault. My fellow officers stood straighter, sweated more, tried harder to be absolutely perfect under his increased scrutiny. Then he reached me. Admiral Cole stopped directly in front of me and just stood there. Long enough for everyone nearby to notice. Long enough for the silence to become uncomfortable. Long enough for me to wonder if this was when he was finally going to let his mask slip completely. When he stepped closer, I could see the calculation in his eyes. This wasn't spontaneous anger. This was planned humiliation. Choreographed degradation designed to destroy my reputation in front of every person I served with. He leaned in close enough that his breath hit my ear, close enough that his words would be clearly audible to the officers standing on either side of me, but not so loud that the entire formation would hear. "You're a disgrace to this uniform. I'll make sure you never command again." The words hit like physical blows. Not because they were true, I knew they weren't, but because of how perfectly calculated they were. Public enough to humiliate me in front of my peers, but private enough that he could deny them later if challenged. Vicious enough to wound, but delivered with a calm professionalism that would make me look unstable if I reacted. He straightened up and looked me directly in the eyes, waiting. Waiting for me to break military bearing. Waiting for me to respond emotionally. Waiting for me to give him the excuse he needed to complete my destruction. I stayed perfectly still. Eyes forward, shoulders square, breathing controlled. Inside, I was counting. Not counting anger. I'd learned to manage that months ago. I was counting minutes. Because I knew something Admiral Cole didn't know. 37 minutes. That's how long until the call would come. He held my gaze for another few seconds, then moved on to the next officer like nothing had happened. But the damage was done. Every officer within earshot had heard him question my fitness for command. Every soldier in the vicinity had seen him single me out for extended, clearly negative attention. The rest of the inspection passed in a blur. Admiral Cole finished his review, dismissed the formation, and strode back toward the command building with the satisfied air of a man who'd accomplished exactly what he'd set out to do. He thought he was burying me in front of everyone, but he was saluting upward without knowing it. I returned to my quarters and waited. 37 minutes became 35, then 30, then 25. I showered off the desert dust and changed into a fresh uniform. I reviewed my daily briefing materials and prepared for the afternoon training schedule. And I watched the clock. At exactly 37 minutes after the end of parade inspection, my secure communication device chimed with an incoming priority message. I looked at the screen and allowed myself the smallest of smiles. Priority command notification. Report to base commander's office immediately to meet your new superior officer. Personnel command authority. I secured my quarters, straightened my uniform one final time, and walked across the base toward the command building. As I walked, I passed soldiers from the morning inspection. Some of them looked at me with curiosity. Word was already spreading that something significant was happening. Others looked away, embarrassed that they'd witnessed my public humiliation. None of them knew they were about to witness my vindication. I entered the command building and walked down the corridor I'd walked hundreds of times before, but never like this. Past the administrative offices where clerks and junior officers handled the daily paperwork that kept the base running. Past the briefing rooms where tactical decisions were made and mission parameters established. Past the conference rooms where careers were built and destroyed. Straight to Admiral Cole's office. The office that would soon be mine. I knocked on the door frame and waited for permission to enter. His voice called out from inside, distracted and slightly irritated. "Come in." I stepped into the office, came to attention, and delivered the words that would change everything. "Admiral Cole, sir. Reporting as ordered to meet my new superior officer." He looked up from his desk with confusion written all over his face. "Mitchell, what are you talking about? I didn't send for you." I held out the communication device with the priority message displayed. "Sir, I received orders from Personnel Command Authority to report here immediately." He took the device and read the message, his confusion deepening with every word. "This has to be a mistake. I'm the base commander. I don't have a superior officer assigned to this facility." That's when his own communication device chimed. Admiral Cole looked at his screen and I watched his face transform. Confusion became shock. Shock became disbelief. Disbelief became the dawning realization that the impossible was actually happening. He read the message once, then again, then a third time, as if repetition might change the words on the screen. Priority Command Notification. Effective immediately, Commander Sarah Mitchell is promoted to Lieutenant Colonel and assigned as Base Commander, Naval Special Operations Facility. Admiral Robert Cole will report to Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell for transition briefing and reassignment orders. By order of Naval Personnel Command. For 30 seconds, neither of us moved. The only sound in the office was the quiet hum of the air conditioning and the distant noise of base operations continuing outside. Admiral Cole looked from his screen to me and back to his screen. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again without any words coming out. I could see his mind racing, trying to process what he was reading, trying to understand how the woman he'd just publicly humiliated could suddenly be his commanding officer. Finally, he found his voice. "This has to be an error. Administrative mistake. I'll call Personnel Command and get this sorted out immediately." "Sir," I said quietly, "I'd recommend reading the message completely before making any calls." His eyes went back to the screen, and I watched him read the additional details he'd missed in his initial shock. Promotion confirmed by Secretary of the Navy. Assignment approved by Joint Chiefs of Staff. Transition to be completed within 72 hours. Secretary of the Navy. Joint Chiefs of Staff. This wasn't some administrative error that could be corrected with a phone call. This was a decision made at the highest levels of Naval Command, signed off on by people so far above Admiral Cole's pay grade that he'd never even met them. He set down the communication device and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. For the first time in our entire relationship, Admiral Cole looked uncertain. "I don't understand," he said, and for a moment, he sounded less like the commanding officer who'd spent months trying to destroy my career and more like the confused man who couldn't figure out how his carefully constructed plan had just collapsed around him. I straightened my shoulders and looked him directly in the eyes. "Admiral Cole, sir. I've been assigned as your new commanding officer. Please have a seat." The hierarchy in that room shifted completely in that single moment. For months, I had stood in this office at attention while he sat behind his desk, making decisions about my career, my assignments, my future. Now he was standing while I remained calm and controlled, and the desk that had been his symbol of authority was about to become mine. He remained standing for another few seconds, perhaps trying to hold on to some vestige of the power dynamic we'd operated under for so long. But military protocol is absolute, and we both knew it. When a superior officer tells you to sit down, you sit down. Admiral Cole moved slowly to one of the chairs in front of the desk, the chairs where subordinates sat when called to account for their actions. "Sir," I said, moving around to the other side of the desk, but remaining standing, "I want you to know that this transition will be conducted with complete professionalism and respect for your years of service." His eyes dropped to the insignia on my collar, the rank he tried to keep from me. Lieutenant Colonel. Base Commander. The position he'd held for 3 years, now mine by order of the highest levels of naval command. "How?" he asked, and his voice was barely above a whisper. "How did this happen?" I could have gloated. I could have thrown his own words back at him, reminded him of every slight, every delayed promotion, every public humiliation. I could have told him exactly what I thought of his leadership style and his treatment of subordinates who dared to question his judgment. Instead, I told him the truth. "Admiral, my service record speaks for itself. The promotion board reviewed my complete file, mission performance, leadership evaluations, tactical innovations, collaborative success with allied forces. They saw an officer ready for increased responsibility." He was quiet for a long moment, processing not just what I was saying, but what I wasn't saying. I wasn't mentioning his attempts to sabotage my career. I wasn't detailing his petty retaliation or his systematic isolation tactics. I was giving him the opportunity to maintain his dignity. The Secretary of the Navy specifically noted my handling of Operation Desert Shield, I continued. The successful extraction with 0 civilian casualties was cited as an example of adaptive leadership under pressure. Admiral Cole's face went pale. The mission where I disobeyed his direct orders, the mission he'd claimed showed my insubordination and poor judgment, had been the deciding factor in my promotion. "Sir," I said, my voice softer now, "I want you to know that I learned a great deal from you during my early career. Your guidance helped shape me into the officer I am today." And that was true. He had shaped me, not just through his positive mentoring, but through his negative example. He'd taught me how power could corrupt judgment, how ego could override mission effectiveness, how personal grudges could poison professional relationships. He'd shown me exactly the kind of leader I never wanted to become. Admiral Cole sat in that chair, my chair now, and I could see him cycling through emotions. Anger at the situation. Embarrassment at being outmaneuvered. Confusion about how his protege had become his superior. And maybe, just maybe, a glimmer of recognition that the woman standing behind his former desk was exactly the officer he'd once believed she could be. "What happens now?" he asked. "Sir, you'll receive reassignment orders within 24 hours. I suspect you'll be offered a position at Naval Command Headquarters in Washington, a lateral move that recognizes your experience while providing new challenges." I'd already spoken to Personnel Command about the transition. Admiral Cole would be reassigned with full honors, no black marks on his record, no official acknowledgement of the tension between us. He'd get a dignified exit that preserved his reputation and his pension. "Why?" he asked, and I knew he wasn't asking about the logistics of his reassignment. "Because you earned 26 years of distinguished service before our recent difficulties," I said. "Because this base runs on the systems and procedures you established. Because the men and women serving here deserve leadership transitions that focus on mission effectiveness, not personal grievances." He taught me what power looked like. I taught him what leadership feels like. Admiral Cole stood up slowly, came to attention, and rendered the most perfect salute I'd ever seen him give. "Ma'am, I'll await my reassignment orders and ensure a complete transition of command responsibilities." I returned his salute with equal precision. "Thank you, Admiral. I'll expect your briefing materials on my desk by 0800 tomorrow." He turned and walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back at me. "Mitchell, Colonel Mitchell, you were right about those children in Syria." "Sir, you were right to adapt the mission parameters. I should have trusted your judgment." Then he walked out of my office, out of what had been his office, and I was alone. I sat down behind the desk for the first time and looked around the room that would now be my command center. The same maps on the walls, the same communication equipment, the same filing cabinets full of operational records. But everything was different because of who was sitting in the chair. For months, Admiral Cole had used his position to try to break me. He'd tried to isolate me, embarrass me, force me out of the service entirely. He'd used every tool of bureaucratic warfare to make my life miserable and my career impossible. But what he never understood was that every obstacle he put in my path only made me more determined to overcome it. Every delayed promotion only motivated me to perform at an even higher level. Every public slight only strengthened my resolve to prove him wrong. He tried to teach me my place. Instead, he'd taught me my potential. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of transition meetings, briefing sessions, and administrative handovers. Admiral Cole was nothing if not professional during the process. He provided detailed briefings on ongoing operations, introduced me to key personnel, and ensured that the change of command would be seamless from an operational perspective. But I could see the strain in his eyes, the way he struggled to maintain his composure while briefing the woman he'd spent months trying to destroy. Every time he had to address me as Colonel or Ma'am, I could see him remembering his own words from the parade ground. "You're a disgrace to this uniform. I'll make sure you never command again." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. On his final day, Admiral Cole requested a private meeting. I agreed, though I wondered what he could possibly have left to say. He entered my office, still strange to think of it that way. In full dress uniform, every decoration and ribbon perfectly aligned. "Colonel Mitchell," he began formally, "I wanted to apologize for my conduct over the past several months." I gestured for him to sit, but he remained standing. "Sir, that's not necessary." "Yes, it is," he interrupted. I let personal feelings interfere with professional judgment. I allowed my ego to override my duty to support the development of promising officers. I became exactly the kind of leader I once criticized. His voice was steady, but I could hear the effort it took to maintain control. "You questioned my decision in Syria, and instead of considering that you might be right, I took it as a personal attack. I spent months trying to punish you for being a better officer than I was willing to admit." I stayed quiet, letting him say what he needed to say. "I received my reassignment orders this morning. Pentagon liaison position, advising on special operations integration. It's actually a promotion disguised as a lateral move." "I'm glad to hear that, sir. You protected my reputation even when I didn't deserve it. You could have buried me with documentation of everything I did to sabotage your career, but you didn't." Admiral Cole reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "This is my letter of recommendation for your personnel file. It details your exceptional performance, your innovative leadership, and your potential for continued advancement." It should have been written months ago. He placed the envelope on my desk. "Colonel Mitchell, you're going to do extraordinary things in this command. The men and women on this base are fortunate to serve under your leadership." He came to attention and saluted one final time. "Ma'am, it has been an honor serving with you." I stood and returned his salute. "The honor was mine, Admiral. Thank you for everything you taught me." And I meant it. He had taught me everything, both through his positive example early in my career and his negative example later. He'd shown me how to lead with integrity and how easy it was to lose that integrity when ego got in the way. Admiral Cole left that afternoon on a transport to Washington. I watched from my office window as his staff car pulled away from the base, carrying him toward whatever came next in his career. That evening, I called a meeting of all senior staff. Time to establish the tone for my command. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, looking around the conference room at the officers who would help me run this base. "We have work to do." I outlined my vision for the next year. Improved training protocols that emphasized adaptive thinking. Enhanced cooperation with allied forces. A culture that rewarded innovative solutions and questioned outdated assumptions. An environment where junior officers felt empowered to speak up when they saw problems. This base will be known for producing leaders who think critically, act decisively, and never forget that our ultimate mission is protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Some of the senior staff looked nervous. They'd grown comfortable with Admiral Cole's more hierarchical style. Others looked excited, ready for the changes I was proposing. All of them looked curious about what kind of leader the woman who'd outlasted Admiral Cole would turn out to be. Over the following weeks, I proved it to them. I implemented new training programs that emphasized scenario-based learning over rote memorization. I established direct communication channels between junior personnel and senior command. I reorganized mission planning to include input from all relevant specialties, not just the senior-most officers. Most importantly, I made it clear that questioning authority, when done professionally and for valid reasons, was not insubordination. It was critical thinking, and critical thinking was essential for effective military operations. The changes weren't popular with everyone. Some of the old guard grumbled about New Age leadership and political correctness. But mission performance improved. Personnel retention improved. Morale improved. 6 months into my command, we received a visit from the Secretary of the Navy. He toured our facilities, observed our training exercises, and met with personnel at all levels. At the end of his visit, he pulled me aside. "Colonel Mitchell, I've been in the Navy for 37 years, and I've never seen a base transformation this comprehensive or this successful. What you've accomplished here in 6 months is remarkable." "Thank you, sir. I've had excellent personnel to work with." "No, this goes beyond good personnel. This is leadership. The kind of leadership we need more of throughout the service." He handed me another envelope, this one containing notification of my selection for the Naval War College's Advanced Leadership Program. "Colonel, you're being fast-tracked for flag rank. The Navy needs leaders who can adapt, innovate, and build consensus while maintaining operational effectiveness. You've proven you can do all of that." 1 year after Admiral Cole's departure, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a simple note written on personal stationery. "Colonel Mitchell, I've been following news about your command. The innovations you've implemented are being studied throughout naval special operations. You've proven that true leadership isn't about asserting dominance, it's about empowering others to excel. You earned it the right way. Admiral R. Cole." I sat in my office, and read that note 3 times. No apology for his behavior, but acknowledgement of my success. No excuses for his actions, but recognition of my character. It was enough. He tried to humiliate me. But what he didn't know was that true authority doesn't shout. It stands still and commands respect. Today, I run one of the most effective special operations bases in the Navy. Our personnel are requested for the most challenging missions because they're trained to think, not just follow orders. Our innovations in tactical operations are being adopted throughout the service. Our retention rates are the highest in the command. But more than that, I've created an environment where the next generation of officers can question, adapt, and lead without fear of retaliation. Where a young mechanic with good instincts can be mentored instead of marginalized. Where effectiveness matters more than ego. Admiral Cole taught me what power looked like, the ability to control others through rank and intimidation. But in trying to destroy me, he taught me something more valuable, what leadership actually feels like. Leadership is the ability to inspire others to be better than they thought they could be. Leadership is creating an environment where people want to excel, not because they're afraid of punishment, but because they believe in the mission. Leadership is standing firm in your principles even when it costs you personally, because you know that integrity is more important than advancement. The man who once called me his best officer, then tried to convince everyone I was his worst mistake, inadvertently created exactly the kind of leader the military needs. Someone who understands that questioning authority isn't insubordination. It's responsibility. Someone who knows that adaptation isn't weakness, it's survival. Someone who learned that the greatest revenge against those who try to break you is refusing to be broken. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button, subscribe, and comment your country below. Because respect isn't rank, it's earned. And sometimes, the same man who tried to destroy your career ends up saluting your name. The uniform doesn't make the officer. The officer makes the uniform worthy of respect. And on that parade ground where Admiral Cole whispered his threats, he thought he was destroying my future. Instead, he was witnessing the moment his protege became his superior. True authority doesn't shout orders from behind a desk. It stands calm under pressure and earns the salute through service, sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to doing what's right, even when what's right isn't easy. Admiral Cole tried to teach me my place. He succeeded. My place is in command.